It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers. Here we are again for your favorite Shakespearean podcast. And on this episode of Don't Quill the Messenger, we invite back a returning guest who hasn't been with us for quite some time. I'm saying a couple of seasons at least. You may remember him from a previous episode. His name is Daniel Stephen Crafts. He is an educator, a consummate musician, and a composer. We're going to talk about all of those aspects of Daniel's life because he's also a staunch Oxfordian, and he has some experience not only teaching the authorship question to university extension students, but also he is in the process of writing a full 3-act opera about the life of Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford. Daniel, welcome back to Don't Quill the Messenger.
So good to be back with you, Stephen.
You know, the first thing I'd like to talk to you about, because I don't know when you were here in the past that we really touched on this much at all, but I really would like to talk about how things have progressed for you over the years. And I know it's been about a decade or so that you have been teaching the authorship question as part of university extension classes. Where, first of all, where is that you do that?
It's in Albuquerque.
Albuquerque, New Mexico.
University of New Mexico.
Oh, yeah. Excellent. And about how many do you do? Is it once a semester, twice a year, once a year? I mean, how many classes do you teach each year?
It's usually about once a year. And it's a 2-hour class. And it's interesting. Most of the people that come to the class are those who've heard a little bit about the question and want to know more. There are some that come that it's completely new to them, and they're wondering what all the fuss is about. And that's the majority of the people that come to the class. Now, in the last couple of sessions, I have had a few people who were rather pushing back on some of the things that I was saying. And that turned out to be rather interesting, actually.
So you have had people who have signed up for the course just to be combative with you about it, to basically cause a debate on purpose?
Wonder why they did. Well, one fellow, an older gentleman, he was just intent on pushing all the Stratfordian talking points. And of course, I know them all, and so I had comebacks for everything that he had to say. Well, one of the things that I start out talking about in the class is saying that English professors, English teachers, English professors really don't have the credentials to talk about the authorship question. And I'll tell you why. Because literary criticism, which is something very important indeed. I mean, there's a whole section of any library devoted to literary criticism, and it's, illuminating the great works of literature. That's a very, very useful thing. That's what literature professors do. But by definition, literary criticism is opinion. It's not fact. The authorship question is a matter of fact. So that's why I say they really don't have the credentials to talk about the problem. The people who should be looking into it are the historians, which do deal, who do deal in fact. But the thing is, they have been very reluctant to take on this particular issue because they feel they're stepping on the toes of the people, their colleagues in literature departments. So for academia, they're really at an impasse. And as I know, as I've heard you say before, trying to convince literary academia of the authorship question is just beating your head against the wall. It does nothing at all. That's why it's so good that we have researchers finding out all this amazing things that they've found out, especially in the last 20 years, by not working in academia.
Well, you can look at how academia treats any new information that has occurred over even just the last couple of centuries. When they suddenly started finding more and more evidence of Vikings in North America. Right? Historians and archaeologists and paleontologists started freaking out and condemning those people who dared say, wait a minute, the Leif Erikson types got here first. They were here. They obviously were here. We found a Viking sword over here, and we found Viking ruins over there, and we found these artifacts here in South Dakota. How is that possible? And look at how vilified they were at first, and how the academia big guns just attacked them with all guns blazing until they couldn't resist admitting anymore. And now they accept it, they admit it, but they kind of just, gloss over it and ignore it and try to pretend it doesn't exist. This is how the upper echelons of academia on every topic and every subject has behaved over the centuries.
Yeah, every topic. This is, the authorship question is really just a microcosm of what's going on in all fields, in so many fields. One of the examples that I bring up in the class is that when I was in the 4th grade, a long, long time ago, I had a desk that was next to the wall, and on the wall was a giant map of the Earth. And I like maps, so I used to study it, sit there and study it. And at one point I said to my teacher, Mrs. Gray, it surely looks to me like the east coast of South America would fit right into the west coast of Africa. And she said, yes, it does, dear, but that's just a coincidence. Land can't move. And that was what all the geologists were saying. The idea of plate tectonics was actually developed in the 1920s, I believe. And it wasn't until the mid-60s, kicking and screaming, that they finally accepted that as how the Earth moves, basically.
Well, they threw Galileo in the tower because he dared say that the Earth revolved around the sun. I mean, these things are real throughout history where, men said, wait a minute, this isn't right. You guys all have this wrong. And the quote unquote authorities were so terrified of losing their power of authority over whatever subject it happened to be that they condemn, they attack, they ad hominem, they go crazy inside out of their fear of loss of that power.
Their whole careers are based on it, essentially. So they can't have an open mind, unfortunately. They should. There's no reason. I mean, somebody the other day just said there's no such thing as settled science. Science is an ongoing project, and there's nothing that can't be questioned. And that motto that many people use, question everything. I agree with that completely. When new evidence comes along, you must be ready to embrace it and see where it takes you.
I always like to blow people away when I tell them that the Big Bang Theory was actually established by a Catholic priest. And they freak out. They're like, that's not true. That's a lie. I'm sorry. Look it up. The Big Bang Theory was first proposed by a Catholic priest who proposed that the Big Bang was the voice of God saying, let there be light, bang, and everything was created. And they're like, that's not true. That can't possibly be true. Look it up, man. It's a fact. Yeah. Then science took it and went, oh, this actually is not a bad idea, but we're just going to take God out of it and say that it just happened all by chance.
Yeah. Well, the one fellow that I had in class who really did push back more than anybody. As I say, he was giving me all these Stratfordian talking points. And the other thing I wanted to mention is at the beginning of the class, I tell people at the end of this 2-hour session, you will know more about the authorship question than virtually all of the literature professors. Why? Because they don't want to know. It's the classic case of I've made up my mind, don't confuse me with facts. And so that's right. Now this guy's just running out all these talking points. The one that he brought up was, there are over 50 candidates that have been proposed for the authorship, including Queen Elizabeth. And I said, yeah, the fact that there are so many candidates shows you how unhappy, unsatisfied people are with the conventional narrative. And then at one point I said, that I like to bring up, I said, now here was Shakespeare's family, illiterate, world's greatest writer, illiterate. Now, he took great exception to that, saying, that's insulting to his family. And I said, well, I don't think they're going to mind. I said, well, first of all, illiterate was probably not even coined at that point. The term probably wasn't even coined at that point, because the vast majority of people in England were illiterate.
I think it was 90%. I think
it was like
able to demonstrate
95% of women and 85% of men or something. It was only the aristocracy and then a few bright university students that were literate. So that's what I say. And then somebody else in the class said, that can't be true because Shakespeare's father, John Shakespeare, was an alderman, so he had to be literate. And I said, no, that's not true. We know for a fact that he signed with a mark. And actually, as I found out just recently, a mark wasn't necessarily an X. Apparently, John Shakespeare made a little drawing of a little glove. That was his mark. That's why it's called a mark rather than an X, because many times people would just draw a little symbol to indicate that they were signing.
And that. In higher classes, they would often have some sort of a signet, whether that was a ring or a small pendant that they wore around their neck that they would use to press onto the paper, or in many cases put sealing wax to put a seal on something, right?
Right. Well, this was probably the poor people's version of that, just drawing a little symbol as their mark. Now, this one woman said apparently she had been involved in some Shakespeare festival in Los Angeles. And anyway, she said, I was kind of leaning towards de Vere as the author until in one of the productions, somebody asked the director, what is the setting of the play? And his response was, the setting is the stage. And I said, a director of Shakespeare would tell you the setting of the stage, or the setting of the play is the stage. I said, I wouldn't let anybody who gave that kind of response within 20 miles of directing a Shakespeare play. I mean, Shakespeare, probably more than any other dramatist that I know of, does everything possible to convince you that it isn't the stage, that you've been transported to a foreign clime somewhere.
So many characters spend a lot of time describing the setting around them
exactly
because of the lack of
yeah.
scenery and the lack of stage sets.
Yeah,
So you have to listen
chorus.
to the words of the character on the stage telling you about, for instance, the sycamore grove outside of Verona, or
Right,
the
right.
the dark and gloominess of the heath of Scotland, for instance. There's a lot of characters. It's very Dickensian. I think Dickens sort of steals from Shakespeare in that way, because a lot of Dickens novels go into extreme detail about, the setting surrounding the characters in the story.
Right. Well, the whole role of the chorus in Henry V is to tell you, well, now we're in England, now we're in France, back and forth. Anyway, but why that would convince her that de Vere wasn't the author, I never did get an answer to. So
That doesn't make any sense at all.
No, I didn't get that at all.
But I'll tell you,
And
I
then
don't know how long ago she was involved in a Shakespeare festival somewhere, but I'll tell you, Daniel, one of the things that I have grown very sad about is a great number of the Shakespeare companies in this country are now run and operated by theater professionals who do not have Shakespeare knowledge, who were not trained in Shakespeare production. They hired their friends and their classmates from university when they were going through their master's programs to come and direct plays that they literally shouldn't touch, that they know nothing about. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they're not great theater directors. It just means that they don't know Shakespeare, and it becomes very obvious in the productions that you see that these directors have, been schooled on directing modern contemporary playwrights, and they just don't have the classical education or the knowledge of the classics that they should have before they touch these great master works.
Yeah. No, and why that would convince her that de Vere wasn't the author, I would love to have talked more about that, but she left before I could do that. And one of the other students in the same class said, well, if the man from Stratford wasn't the author, I would be brokenhearted. And I said, why? From everything we know about him, for all the actual facts about him, he sounds to be a horrible person. Why would, and again, I didn't get any real straight answers from them.
Well, that's also a symptom of our modern society right now. It's not about the truth. It's about how you feel.
Yes,
right? It's not about facts.
Absolutely.
It's about feelings.
Absolutely.
Right? Well, this would hurt my feelings, so I don't want to believe it to be true. You can't say that because it hurts my feelings. It triggers me. So, but it's the truth. I don't care. It triggers me. I identify that the sky is green. So when you talk about how beautifully blue the sky is, that hurts my feelings. It's ridiculous.
Oh yeah, I'm with you on that completely. Yeah. Oh well.
So tell me about like some success stories. Tell me about teachers' pets, those who want to give you an apple at the end of the session because you've convinced them, you've opened their eyes, or what I would hope is the case. And what I see quite often with people that I bring to this issue for the first time is they actually get angry. They get angry because they feel like they've been lied to and they've been deceived. And they kind of want to lash out at their literature professors and their English teachers who shielded them from these truths, or at least made sure they never knew anything about it. Do you see some of that?
Mm-hmm. Nobody has said anything like that to me. Frequently, I see people scribbling away as I'm talking, and mostly I think they're just curious and they want more information. I've gotten a lot of very nice reviews after the class. They have a questionnaire, and most people really appreciate the class, and said, "Oh, it's opened my eyes to something I didn't really realize." So, no, I've gotten very, very positive responses. overwhelmingly positive responses for it. So.
Well, I think that's encouraging too, because, I say this all the time here on this program. I know what my research and study has led me to believe, but it still keeps me open to more information and other theories.
Yes.
But I also say that every one of us has to have our own journey into this mystery. And if they're scribbling notes during the class, hopefully what it is they're writing down things that they want to go look up and research on their own and begin their own journey as a super sleuth into trying to solve the mystery. And, you find different things are compelling to different people. Some people are very compelled with the idea that the plays were written so much earlier, and to them that makes sense, so they want to dive into that aspect of it. Some people are compelled by the relationship between the author and the queen, which I think is very prevalent through the works. And so they dive into that. Some people are compelled by the idea that Marlowe's death was faked, and that maybe that's because he was really the author and he went off into seclusion somewhere and kept writing. Like, whatever it is that intrigues people is the avenue that I encourage them to rabbit hole. Like, go on, dive into that hole. And who cares how many others have taken that plunge before you? You might be the one who finds the piece of gold at the bottom of the shaft. And so go ahead, dig. Mm-hmm. One of the things that makes me very upset is certain, Oxfordian scholars who say, oh, that stone has been looked under 18 times already by me and several others, and there's no point in examining it again. Well, wait a minute. Who are you? You have perfect 20/20 eyesight? You had the best microscope? You don't know. Why discourage fellow skeptics from repeating research? You never know when someone, again, the science analogy, you never know when someone else's experiment is going to turn out differently or produce different results or change the world in some way.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, for me, the most interesting research that's being done is finding out what are the topical illusions in the plays. We understand that they are just loaded with topical references to things, to people, to events, and the more we find out about that, the better we can understand the play. And that's the kind of research that I'm most interested in reading personally.
What would you say, based on, I would think that after 10 years of teaching these courses, that the course material has changed somewhat here and there along the way. Sometimes you realize, this aspect wasn't as effective as this, or I find students are more interested in this aspect than that, so I should spend more time on the latter than the former, type of a thing. At this point, though, I think you've refined it probably pretty well. And what would you say are the top 4 or 5 points that land home the hardest and really cause the most thought?
Interesting. I have changed the lecture as I find out more things myself, more things that I find are more compelling for me. I really just present what to me seems the most compelling material, the most interesting material. I know I have presented a little bit about some of the cryptography, and even Alexander Waugh goes into that a great deal, maybe more than, I'm not saying it's wrong, but to tell you the truth, it really doesn't interest me all that much. For me, it doesn't illuminate the plays in any way. So I do tend to avoid that. And I think one person...
God rest Alexander's soul, but I'm certain where he is from his perch above, he is still laughing at how much debate that has caused in the authorship mystery circles, whether the cryptography is worthwhile, not worthwhile, beneficial, not beneficial, tells us anything, doesn't tell us anything. I mean, he would probably be cackling at the fact that continues to be this source of debate and contention among especially Oxfordians, probably on a daily basis.
Yeah, right. Well, it just, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying anything that he said is wrong. Actually, I'm not saying anything that anybody says is wrong. I keep an open mind about absolutely everything. But that the cryptography stuff doesn't really, for me, it doesn't illuminate the plays in any way.
It's also very dense. I would say, as far as like, if there are like degrees of study of this topic, I would say that one is, starting to enter the stratosphere. And you really have to work your way to that. It's definitely not the White Zinfandel of Shakespeare authorship mystery. And I use that term because, people call White Zinfandel sort of like a gateway wine. Once you start drinking that wine, then you start to develop a better flavor for a little more complex notes. And eventually, you'll get to your Cab Sauves and enjoy them. So I'd have to say, the cryptography is definitely maybe more in the port range.
Okay.
It's one of those finishing wines,
Yeah, I just think there are more compelling things to talk about, and so. But I definitely, every time I teach the class, it's slightly different than what it was before. Mostly based on new information that I've gotten myself that I think is more interesting. So, well, anyway, as you know, by profession, I am a composer of opera and symphonic music. And I want to use my professional abilities to further the cause in any way I can. And the first thing I wrote, and actually we talked about this on a previous podcast, is we
played a piece of your music, and I want to say we also it included a tenor singing a portion.
Yes, well that was the Symphony Number 17. The work I wrote before that was a monodrama, or actually a duodrama, because it's for actor and singer, and it brings back the spirit of the man from Stratford to contemporary times to tell his story, and then there are music interludes that go along with that. And then a few years later, I realized. I'm at my Symphony Number 17. 17. Where have I heard that number before? And then I just realized, okay, the theme of this has to be the authorship question. And the final movement is a setting of the sonnet 72 that has the famous line, "My name be buried where my body is," which to me really sums up the whole question. So that's the final movement, and it's sung so beautifully by the great tenor Brian Cheney, and it's up on YouTube. Actually, if you just type in my name and Symphony Number 17, it will come up. But then in recent times, I've been working on this Gonzo opera project. And again, you talked about this on a previous podcast.
Yeah, I think that was actually, for those who want to go back and find that episode, I believe that was part of the title.
It was called Going Gonzo.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Right. Well, what it very briefly summarize this is it's genuine opera sung by real opera singers, but with wild and crazy plots and characters you would never ever expect to find in traditional opera. And it's been great fun. But I want to write one.
Now, wait a minute, Daniel. I have to stop you because I would say that there are a lot of crazy characters you would not expect to find in life that you find in opera. I mean, Tosca is pretty extreme. I Pagliacci is pretty extreme. I mean, these are very extreme, very unique, weird characters that I don't think you would really find in life that you find on the opera stage. The Barber of Seville is pretty extreme.
Well, those are yeah. Well, these take those characters to the extreme. For example, the first Gonzo opera was Too Much Coffee Man, about this character in a red jumpsuit with a giant coffee cup on his head that he and his buddy Espresso Guy hang around the coffee shop and wax poetic about life, love, and coffee, to the extreme annoyance of the barista. And then the second act takes place on Mars. So that just gives you an idea of the kind of the wild and crazy things that we did in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to write. I've written 6 full-scale orchestral operas, and I'm not going to say serious operas because, as I'm sure you would agree, comedy is every bit as serious. Good comedy is every bit as serious as tragedy. And so that's why, to distinguish them, I simply say dramatic as opposed to comic.
There's that great George Burns quote, and a lot of my listeners probably don't know who George Burns is, but if you're old enough, you do. But he had that great quote, which I'm probably paraphrasing, but basically, in essence, he said, "Comedy is serious business."
Yeah. It is, absolutely. To write really good comedy satire is one of the most difficult things there is to write. And fortunately, I've had a number of librettists who are able to write really good comedy. So I'm very pleased with that. But the one that I'm working on right now, it's going to be a full 3-act orchestral opera about Edward de Vere. And we're still working out the basic storyline. But it's going to begin right after he returns from his tour, his European tour. He's coming back from France, and he's set upon by the pirates, and his goods are stolen, and they don't kill him, fortunately for us, but they set him on the coast of England, stripped to the waist, and that will be the opening scene. It'll go from there, and he's still furious from the rumors that he believes are true, that his wife has been unfaithful and that she's had a child by someone else. Whether or not that this is true, that's still one of the open questions, but he believes it is, and he's furious about it. So that's how the opera opens, and it isn't until the 3rd act that the man.
So let's see. My numbers aren't always correct, but we're talking like 1576, 1577. He's like 26, 27 years old.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's after his European tour, and so then I won't introduce the man from Stratford until the 3rd act. And the thing is, there are so many holes in the story that, for example, how, when, and why did the man from Stratford come into the picture? And
I think that's the giant question now, as far as Oxford
in the story.
Yeah, I think as far as authorship mystery topics go, I think that's the giant one that's the big one. Yeah, needs to be answered. Was Ben Jonson the catalyst of that? Was it done on purpose? Is it an accident? Did the Stratford man know he was going to be used that way? Was he complicit in it? Was he a part of it? Was it literally a coincidental name? Like, how did that? I think that's the big question. I think the biggest part of that is 1623. How did they decide all of that when the folio was published? I think is the big issue.
Did de Vere pick him himself? Did de Vere know him? So I'm going to have to answer some of these questions just based on hopefully educated guesses that may turn out to be right or may turn out to be wrong. We'll just have to see. We'll go from there.
Well, that's what makes it historical fiction, right?
Exactly. Well, I'm working with a wonderful, wonderful writer as librettist, Jonathan David Dixon. And once we get the basic scenario down, then he'll go ahead and write the libretto. And I usually work very quickly. So
that's a name that a lot of the Quiller Nation would be familiar with. Jonathan David Dixon. Mainly, I would say because of his YouTube videos about the authorship question.
Yes, right. He's made a number of 3-minute
very fun, very witty, very comical and pointed videos where he plays multiple characters, right? Where he's the skeptic and then he's the professor of academia and he goes back and forth. Those are very entertaining.
Yeah, and the one I like the best is addressing the question, who cares who wrote the plays? What difference does it make? And he has his friend, the British actor David Frankham, playing a conductor, and he said, "Oh yes, I'm conducting the Ninth Symphony. Oh, I love it so much. It's such a wonderful piece of music. Gives me goosebumps." And then the interviewer says, "Yes, well, who wrote that?" And he looks puzzled and he says, "Well, I don't know. Who cares?" And I've often addressed that in class, where I say, what does it matter? Does it matter who wrote the plays? Well, does it matter who Beethoven was? Does it matter who Mozart was? Does it matter who Einstein was? Does it matter who you are? If
just 2 or 3 episodes ago, I had this same conversation with a guest who is a former university theater professor, and we talked about the authorship question, and that tends to be an answer that a lot of theater people will give, not necessarily academics in literature or English, but definitely a lot of theater academics will give that answer of, well, does it really matter? And I always throw back at them and say, in that particular instance, I said, well, does it matter who August Wilson is? Does it matter who Tennessee Williams was? I don't think, how about Arthur Miller? Does it matter who these men were to help us understand their works and appreciate their works? Because I think it does. I feel like it absolutely does.
If it doesn't matter who the greatest writer in the English language was, how can it matter who anybody is, really?
Then why put a byline on anything?
On anything. Yes, absolutely. Well, that will get into something that I want to discuss a little later about tendencies in academia. But there are a couple of things that I would like to throw out to the Oxfordian community, a couple of points that I don't think have been given the weight that they deserve. And one of the question is that I have, the introduction or the dedication to the second long poem, Rape of Lucrece. It begins with, "The love I dedicate to your lordship is without end."
I feel like that needs to be a lyric in one of the songs of your opera.
Well, it may be, but for anybody who knows anything about class relations in Elizabethan England would know that no commoner would ever say such a thing. The love I dedicate to your lordship. No commoner would ever think of saying such a thing to a nobleman, let alone put it in print. Therefore, anybody reading that would know that, in fact, this is one nobleman writing to another. And given the insular society of the court, the small group of people that were the court, where everybody knew everybody else's business, of course, they would know exactly who that was writing to Southampton. And, Alexander Bois, again, had this wonderful series of cryptic references that he called so-and-so knew, so-and-so knew.
Mm-hmm.
I think he has like 24 of those that he put up. Well, I would say based on the first line of this dedication, everybody knew. Everybody at court would have known exactly who that was writing. So, and I don't think that's been mentioned before, but I don't think enough weight.
And especially those two poems, both of them were so popular and received multiple printings because of how popular they were. And I would argue that the reason they were so popular, some say that Venus and Adonis was so popular because of, it has this sort of erotic tone and nature to it.
Right.
But I would argue that one of the reasons that they were both so popular was because everyone knew, and because everyone wanted to get their hands on it, because of all the gossip, right?
Yeah, right.
There's a line in 12th Night where the sea captain who rescues Viola and brings her to shore says something to the degree of, what the great ones do, the lesser ones will talk about. And I think that there's some obvious proof of that in the fact that suddenly these poems were flying off the bookstall sellers' shelves. Everyone wanted to, be whispering about this quote unquote William Shakespeare writing to the Earl of Southampton, this, glowing jewel of a young man who was up and coming and the dandy of the court at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. They may have wanted to see if they were even mentioned in the poem in some disguise or another or something. So,
sure. Can I find myself in there?
Yeah, right. Who knows? But I think just the fact that this was the love I dedicate to your lordship should have told everybody exactly who it was that was writing that. And
now let me ask you, back to the opera real quick, though, because this is curious to me, is Edward de Vere a tenor or is he a baritone?
I'm thinking, I haven't quite decided yet. I want to see the whole text, the whole libretto, and decide at that page. He won't be a bass, I'll tell you that.
No, that wouldn't be good.
Probably
maybe the captain of the pirate ship could be your bass.
Yeah, well, I may write it for my good friend, the wonderful tenor Brian Cheney. I may write it for him.
Will the Earl of Southampton be a character in the opera?
I'm not at this point. I don't think so.
He'd be too young.
But I'm not sure. Yeah, that's right. He would be quite young at that point. So.
Yeah, he'd be a toddler. By the time, I don't know how many years the opera is going to span, but by my calculation, he'd be an infant at first and maybe a toddler by the end. So I guess that doesn't.
Yeah.
So he can't be the tenor. That's what I'm saying. Because obviously you have to have a tenor, right? But does the tenor have to be Edward de Vere? I don't know.
No, it depends. We'll see.
I kind of feel like he'd be a bass. Not a bass, a baritone. I kind of feel like he'd be like a baritone, maybe second tenor. A baritone who can hit second tenor notes, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. We haven't worked out the characters yet, so we'll see. I just have the basic sketch of an outline, really. So we'll see. But it's in the works, and I definitely have music bouncing around in my head that I'm anxious to get out. So.
Well, I think there's a song there. The love I dedicate to your lordship is without end.
Could be. That may be a good idea. Actually, if any listeners have ideas, by all means, send them in. I'm interested, as I say, it's by no means cast in stone. We don't even have the stone yet. So that would be fine. Ideas are definitely welcome. The other thing that I want to point out, something again that I think has not given the weight that it needs to have. There is that famous. This is Jonathan Dixon I met him when he came down from Santa Fe to one of my classes. And then we talked afterwards, and I realized he knew as much about the subject as I did. And he just came down because he wanted to meet me. And I'm so glad he did, because we've become great friends and collaborators. We've actually written 2 previous operas together. And he gave me a paper that he had written. And the gist of the paper documents 3 contemporary references talking about noblemen writing under another name. Now, the most famous one that many of your listeners will be familiar with was from The Art of English Poesy by George Puttenham. And he writes in there, "So as I know, very many noble gentlemen of the court that have written commendably and suppressed it again, or else suffered it to be published without their own names to it." And then a little later, he says, first in that number is Edward de Vere. Mm-hmm. Now, notice what he says. He doesn't just say gentlemen, plural. He doesn't just say many notable gentlemen. He says very many noble gentlemen. And to my mind, this should send shivers up the spines of Stratfordians, in that it's not just a Shakespeare authorship question, it is an Elizabethan authorship question. How do we know who wrote what? And that's what they should have been researching all along. For instance, I know you're familiar with the famous quote about the Earl of Derby. I think it was the Spanish ambassador that wrote in his journal, the Earl of Derby is busy penning comedies for the common players, mm-hmm. right? You remember that, mm-hmm. I'm sure. And, well, do we have them? Are they extant? And whose name is on them?
Well, a lot of people, and I think there's a great argument to be made here, the Earl of Derby, W.S., William Stanley was his name, is the son-in-law of Edward de Vere.
Yes.
And so did he get his hands on his father-in-law's manuscripts and then, make some alterations, make some changes, add some contemporary references? Did he end up helping edit the first folio because it was his wife who ended up with her father's manuscripts? I mean, that connection is something I think that needs to be more fully explored.
Absolutely. I agree completely about that. I'm just wondering, but I have to emphasize it's an Elizabethan authorship question. Who wrote what? And, for many of the people who advocate other candidates for the authorship, almost invariably one of their arguments is that their candidate wrote under another name. Well, they're probably quite right about that. I mean, I don't think it was Shakespeare, but they probably were writing under another name. So who was really an author and who was just a front man? And I think there's a great deal of research that needs to be done that. Now, Robert Prechter has done a marathon job in his Oxford's Voices.
Oh, yes, and he's been a guest here on the program to discuss that work, yeah.
And I don't always agree with his conclusions necessarily, but I think he's done just a heroic job of setting the groundwork for all of it. He's certainly convinced me that Thomas Nash is a pseudonym or allonym or something. I don't think it was Oxford. It seems to me that was more likely one of Oxford's buddies that was doing that. Because he's at the height of his career, he'd be engaging in this petty pamphlet war with the curmudgeon Gabriel Harvey, and I don't think he would be wasting his time doing that. But one of his buddies, very likely his son-in-law, or one of the other people, one of the other writers at Fisher's Folly, would be very likely to have been Thomas Nash. So anyway, I think a lot of research has to be done more about just who wrote what in the Elizabethan era because it's the golden age of pseudonyms. I think I read some statistic that within a period of 150 years, that period there, including the Elizabethan age, there's documented something like 2,000 pseudonyms that can be cited. So there's
I had a fascinating guest sometime last year, and her name escapes me right now at the minute, but she was an expert and scholar in the early writings of the 1530s and 1560s, that era when English literature was really being born, as it were. Plays like Gorboduc,
right.
coming to light, and the initial sonnets taken from, the Laura poems. And when you look at some of those early things and how the idea of putting, a nobleman putting their name on certain things was very novel, and then at one point started to become very distasteful.
Yes,
there's a shift that happens there right around the 1560s, I would say, when suddenly allonyms and pseudonyms start to take off like gangbusters because for some reason it falls out of favor.
Yeah. Well, it was because you were seen to be engaging in trade if you were publishing your work, and noblemen just did not do that. But any young nobleman who thought he had something to say would simply go out and find a front man to publish it. And I'm sure the great bulk of it was complete rubbish, but who knows who wrote what? So that's something I would love to see more research, a subject on which I would love to see more research. So
someone needs to write a book called Fisher's Folly, and it just needs to be a chapter on each of the members of that group and what we think they wrote, what we know they wrote, who they worked for and about and with. I mean, really dive into people like Anthony Munday and John Lilly and Thomas Fletcher and Beaumont and, whoever that team of writers were, figure out, do the backstories on all of them. And then tie them all to Edward de Vere as the ringleader of that. And now you have a foundation. You don't even have to mention Shakespeare at all in that.
I know.
But you would have this foundation of, okay, here's this group of literary agents, as it were, all working for this one guy. And then in the very last chapter, you could say, oh, and by the way, they might have actually created the name William Shakespeare as a brand for some of the stuff they were writing. Yeah.
Well, undoubtedly, they were all trading ideas. In fact, we know for a fact they were doing that. And I think that's probably maybe they gave ideas to de Vere about some of the plays, and the ones that he liked, he took. And then in the later stage of his life, he was revising them all based on his early writings and on some of the ideas that he'd gotten from some of his literary colleagues. That seems to me to be likely how that happened. So anyway, one other thing I wanted to mention, years ago indeed, when I was an undergraduate student in the literature department at a university, there was one of the professors was a big advocate of the school of thought called New Criticism. Now, New Criticism says the only thing in studying a work of literature, the only thing that is relative, that is of importance, is the text itself. That anything outside of that, historical conditions, life of the author, anything but the text, simply is a distraction from giving you a truly scientific analysis of the work of art. And the new critics would actually say such things as a truly scientific analysis, if you can believe that. Well, I'll tell you, I argued with that professor throughout the whole course. Well, I got nearly to the end and I just dropped it because I knew I wasn't going to get a very good grade because all I did was argue with him about that. And so this is one of the tendencies in academia, new criticism. Then came along in the completely opposite direction, the tendency called the new historicism, where for them, the only thing that has any significance is the historical context, to the point where one of their writers, I'm not even going to mention his name, I don't want to give him the publicity, one of their writers declared the death of the author, in that because these ideas were in the air, and it was only a matter of time until someone wrote them down. And attributing them to a specific author is giving that author far more credit than he or she deserves. And so we no longer talk about the author, we talk about the author entity. Now, I sometimes there's a website that has it's sort of a for fun questions. Supposedly you click on things and it gives money to charity. Anyway, one of the questions that came up a few months ago was it's a multiple choice thing, and the question was, who wrote The Merchant of Venice? A, Charles Dickens, B, George Eliot, C, Edgar Allan Poe, D, author entity. I kid you not.
That's very interesting, because I was just about to say, does this author entity theory actually lend more credibility to a Shakespeare authorship mystery?
Well, actually, for both schools, if I could even call them schools, for both of these tendencies, the authorship question is rendered moot for different reasons. But for both of them, the authorship is rendered moot. Now, I've heard some Oxfordians say, oh, they came up with these theories to counter the authorship question. No, they came up with this ridiculous nonsense all on their own.
I would argue a lot of that is because of, the movement against, the white patriarchy, and against the, non-PC authors of these great works. And so if we can just dismiss the author, we can still appreciate the work without getting stained or smeared by the author's reputation or the history of how they lived their lives, right? I would argue that it's probably spawned more from that than it is from the idea of trying to counter authorship mystery claims. But I might argue that the author entity concept does lend some strength to the idea that the author entity, known as William Shakespeare, was a creation out of the minds of multiple writers who were all working together under Edward de Vere to create these works, especially the history plays, which I believe were commissioned propaganda from the Queen, for the Queen and for England.
Yes, I agree. But they wouldn't let you go that far. You're attributing it to a group of people, and they don't even want to be bothered with that. It's just, it's in the air, and who wrote it down is completely irrelevant.
It was definitely in the air because, historically speaking, it was necessary. It was necessary to engender this British nationalism at a time of great threat. It was necessary to strengthen Elizabeth's Tudor claims to the throne. It was necessary to thwart off the condemnation of the Pope, of the Queen as a heretic and as an illegitimate bastard, and to thwart the intentions of Spain and the impending Armada. So, in the sense of historicism, you're right. It was in the air. It was all over the air.
Well, no, I agree completely with that. You cannot understand a work of literature without understanding its historical context. Yes, but they take it so ridiculously far to the point where they just miss the author. That's the whole thing of it. Yes, of course, you have to have historical context. One of the things I brought up with this one professor, we were studying Paradise Lost by Milton. And I said, okay, looking at just the text, you tell me what is the motivation for Lucifer wanting to rebel against this perfect place called heaven. You won't find it in the text. The only motivation is that heaven is very much organized like elitist British society at the time, which gave rise to the revolution. So yes, historical context absolutely matters, but to take it as far as they do in the other direction is just nonsense.
And I suppose it wouldn't matter that Milton was influenced by Dante at all either.
No. Oh no, absolutely not. Yeah.
So in that, like, you know, I don't know, theory, ideology, a writer's influence upon another writer, or a writer's exposure to works of art, or to monuments, or to other cultures, for instance, none of that plays a part in the influencing of the text. That's so ridiculous.
No, in neither of these schools. That's the thing. In new criticism, it doesn't matter because it's only the text that's important. In the new historicism, it's only the historical context. Purely is the historical context that's significant.
Well, I could just as easily say then there's no difference between you or I. It doesn't matter how much exposure you have had or how much learning you have had in music theory and composition. I can compose an opera just as well as you can with zero education or knowledge about music.
Because the melodies are in the air.
Because they're in the air right now.
All you have to, it's just a matter of time before someone plucks them out. And
this sounds very much like Marxism in a lot of ways to me. It's like, you know, eliminate the individual, eliminate individual credit for anything. It all belongs to the collective whole. It's like the Borg from Star Trek.
That takes the Marxist ideology far beyond what it was ever intended. I mean, Marxist criticism is saying that you do have to understand the social context in order to truly understand a work of art. But that's as far as it goes. And I agree with that completely. But they take it just to ridiculous levels. That's the point anyway. So
well, I think Edward de Vere would be both angered and pleased by that. In the one hand, he would be angered because he would say, are you crazy? How much of my life is poured into these works? But on the other hand, he would say, this is beautiful because he obviously went to great lengths to disguise himself. And to prevent there being outward knowledge of his contributions to the works of Shakespeare.
But there was never any question that there was a real person who wrote the works, a real author, whoever it was. That was never in question. No,
I feel like author entity is sort of like, there's that whole idea of like, if you give a monkey a typewriter, he'll eventually write Hamlet.
There you go.
You remember that theory floated around for a while. I want to say back in the 80s, maybe.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's the logical conclusion to that tendency. Yes,
because
absolutely.
Hamlet was just floating around in the air, and the monkey absorbed it and hit the right keys at the right time.
Right. Yeah, he just happened to come along and put it down. Well,
that's crazy.
Anyway, so.
Well, I don't think
that's essentially what the things I wanted to bring up.
I don't think either of those actually hurt us in the long run as, super sleuths committed to solving this mystery. I would say, if anything, they actually add fuel to the fire that I was pointing out earlier, where a lot of the people I know who are first introduced to the authorship mystery find themselves angry. They find themselves mad at their high school English teacher or their college literature professor. And in some cases, they want to call them up and say, why didn't you ever tell me this? In a lot of cases, those of us who are older, some of those people don't exist anymore. So you can't call them up and say, why didn't you ever tell me this? But the younger folks, some of whom are not long out of education, I know of a few who have contacted their former literature professors from college and their high school English teachers and sent them an email and said, you lied. You never told us this. Why did you never share this? And have had some fun debate back and forth with their former educators, which I think is a great thing.
Oh, that's great. I'd love to hear those conversations.
I would too. I've been privy to a couple just by emails that were shared with me. But they're not, I'm not allowed to, I've been instructed not to share them with others, type of a thing. Because
sure.
The people involved didn't want to embarrass the professor or the English teacher.
Right.
They just wanted to share what response they received when they questioned, But I do think that there is a healthy level of skepticism that has been growing among the younger generations as they look around and they see the quote unquote great institutions around them losing credibility left and right over countless different topics and issues, whether it be science, and I say that with big air quotes, or whether that be economics, whether that be academia, whether that be, government as a whole. And it doesn't matter what side of any table you're on or what side of any aisle you're on. I think healthy skepticism is important in maintaining the checks and balances that keeps a democratic republic functioning properly. And I think that we're seeing what I believe an encouraging amount of young people who are tired of just taking it spoonful at a time and swallowing it down without questioning what's in the spoon.
Stephen, I could not have said that better. That is exactly the point that I would like to make myself. Yes, credibility in experts is at an all-time low for very, very good reason. We have been lied to and lied to and lied to by government agencies and then corporations. And yes, I think that healthy skepticism of the young people is what we can look forward to more than anything at all. I agree with you absolutely about that.
It's an oversaturation of marketing at every level. And I mean every level. And, whether it's the politician who's marketing themselves because they need more donors to stay in power, or it's the corporation marketing themselves because they need more profit shares to keep their shareholders happy, whether it's the academics who are marketing themselves because they have a new textbook to sell, or because they need tenure, or because they need more donors to donate to the university to pay their giant salaries. Or, for a long time, the marketing was all you have to do is get a 4-year degree and you're guaranteed a job, which was utter bullshit. And now you have a lot of young people who have come out of university and they have that 4-year degree and they can't get a job. And I just saw a statistic the other day, 67% of people with 4-year college degrees are not using their degree in their current employment. But they still have all that debt.
You don't need it if you're sweeping floors. Yeah.
And what did they pay for? They paid the salaries of those same members of academia who kept lying to them.
Yes.
And they're starting to wake up and they're starting to realize those professors do nothing but profess.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So I feel like we are in the soil is becoming healthier for new seeds to be planted. And I feel like no time before, we are in a place where paradigms can shift and will shift.
Yes.
And I think that's true about the Shakespeare authorship mystery right now at this time in history.
I think so too. This is a time when people are open to all points of view and are not going to give more credibility to somebody just because he's a so-called expert. Yeah, I think that's the most hopeful thing that we're seeing.
Or because they have a bunch of letters after their name, right?
Yeah.
And, here was the risk that I think a lot of those academics didn't think about is, well, if you keep encouraging all this the entire generation to go get college degrees, and then they all have college degrees, well, aren't they now equal to you?
Yeah.
And now they look around and realize, well, wait a minute, I have the same degree as you. What makes you more qualified than me?
Right. Uh-huh.
And I think that's happening as well, right?
Yeah.
In certain fields, particularly, especially, the literary fields and the liberal education fields, particularly. Yeah. So the question that I have for you to play a little bit of devil's advocate, Daniel, is as we look at this changing landscape and we look at these evolving generations, I have to ask you, is opera still a viable art and still a viable medium for the exposing of ideas and stories? And how is that going to work?
That is a very, very good question, Stephen. Yes. Opera has become an elitist art form, which I hate. There's nothing about the form itself that is elitist, but how it's treated socially is an elitist art form. Half the times you go to opera openings, and half the audience leaves after the first act because they're simply there to be seen, and they could care less about the music. So in a way, that's why the Gonzo Opera Project is so intriguing to me. Somebody once called it opera for everybody, or opera for the rest of us, and I thought that's kind of
opera for the groundlings, as it were.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So that's why taking characters like Too Much Coffee Man, they're the characters that hang around the coffee shop that you see every day, or other things. The latest one we did was called, it's actually, the title comes from Shakespeare. It's called Blind Cupid Online, the Dating Opera. And the libretto was written by somebody who's been through every dating program under the sun, on and off. And it's documenting all.
And was still yet to be hit by the blind boy's butt shaft.
That's right. Well, she's actually getting married these days, but she had so many crazy stories, and that made a wonderful opera. And we just produced that a few months ago. Yeah, so.
Well, I'm glad you're finding audiences, but I'll be curious, once you have this de Vere opera completed, what your plans are about how to debut it, how to market it, how to draw an audience for it. Is there a working title?
No, there isn't a working title yet. I'm sure there's plenty of material throughout the whole of the works of Shakespeare to pick a title, but we haven't done that yet. But no, I don't know. I'm not even bothering to think about that at the moment. I just want to get the basic scenario down, and then Jonathan can finish the libretto. And once I set it to music, then we'll worry about marketing it. So we'll go from there.
Well, I certainly wish you lots of concentrated brain power so that you can work diligently and feverishly upon it, as I believe our author must have done when he was scribbling out blank verse at a feverish pace during his lifetime.
Well, it could be so much fun, especially when with the Gonzo operas. You know, I don't even work at the piano anymore. I just work at the computer. But I'm seeing these crazy characters and scenes in my head, and I'm just laughing to myself as I'm imagining them and writing down the music. It's just been great fun.
Well, you know, our dear friend Earl Showerman, who has been a frequent guest here on the program and has even been a guest host most recently. He coined a phrase that he says that members of his family always call him the Obnoxfordian. And I'm certain he would be thrilled if you created a Gonzo opera character called Obnoxfordian, who is constantly singing about how the Earl of Oxford is the real Shakespeare, and all of these, you know, literary types around him are just so sick and tired of hearing about it.
That could be a character. That could definitely be a character in one of them. You've seen that Leslie Howard movie where he talks about the Earl of Oxford.
Yes, it's a modern take on the Scarlet Pimpernel.
Yes, right.
The film you're talking about.
And he doesn't just mention it once, he brings it up like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, and including to like a group of like Nazi soldiers too. Like, it's just so random.
Exactly. Yes. But it was, you know, I watched the movie and I thought, oh yeah, that's where it comes from. He brings it up, but then he brings it up again, and then he brings it up a 3rd time later. And somebody's saying, oh, well, that's not proof that he believed that, because he was maybe, you know, he was just an actor reciting lines, but he produced that movie.
It was obviously top of mind for him at the time.
Absolutely, yeah. So that
my guess is that he had at that time come upon J.T. Loney's book.
It was just after that. It was just after that book had been published.
Yeah, that's my guess. I mean, I have no proof of that, but it does seem to me that he had just recently come upon that book and read it and went, holy smokes, Batman.
Guess what?
Yeah. And the way it's used in the dialogue is actually very clever.
Yes, it is.
You know, because he's talking about his own disguise, right?
Yes.
He's talking about how the Scarlet Pimpernel is, you know, basically a pseudonym for, you know, the good acts that he is doing. And, you know, what's interesting about that tale, you know, the original story, and, you know, Leslie Howard also played in a version of the original story too, in his earlier career as an actor, set during the French Revolution, you know. And in the original story, it's Sir Percy, who is the Pimpernel in disguise, right? He's sort of this foppish, flamboyant, Italianate type of nobleman in England, who behind the scenes is actually this dashing swordsman saving people from the guillotine. But he recruits a group of other men who all help him in his exploits, and they all become the Scarlet Pimpernel.
Yes, right.
And so there again, you see this sort of parallel to my theory about what the name William Shakespeare eventually became. I think it became a brand.
Leslie Howard keeps going around reciting that poem to everyone.
Yeah.
They seek him here, they seek him there. Is he in heaven? Is he in hell? That damned elusive Pimpernel. He recites that poem like 3 or 4 times to
and you know, Frank Wildhorn wrote the Broadway musical, and he includes that as one of the songs in the musical.
Of course.
Yeah, and it's played by Percy himself in like a parlor surrounded by all these English, nobility and the king himself. And he's playing it on harpsichord, and he's singing this song and the king's like, "You're a nincompoop," because he thinks he's just such a fop and a loser.
Yeah, that's funny. That would be perfect. I haven't seen the musical, but that would be perfect.
I had the great pleasure of being in a production of it many years ago, and it is a really beautiful and brilliantly written musical. It's very difficult to produce because high production value.
Yeah,
And I would argue that that's one of the things that sort of both elevated and doomed opera. So you mentioned that opera has sort of become this like elite art form. I think initially it was intended to be so. It was the most famous of all operas were performed for royalty and nobility.
That's true.
And I think that a big part of what has happened over the centuries now is that they're so expensive to produce that the ticket prices are inevitably high because you have to make the nut. And in order to do so, you have to price every seat at a certain range in order to make back that money. And it outprices, the common people. And so then people can't afford to bring their children to see opera, which is where once you're exposed to it as a young person, you might become a lifelong audience member. You know what I mean? Not like you can bring your kids to see, a Broadway musical on tour that's happening through your community, or, even better, you can go see community theater, or, here where I'm at, you could see community Shakespeare, and get introduced to it for a reasonable price. So I think that's a big part of it, because operas are just so giant in scope and so expensive.
That's one of the advantages of Gonzo opera. The orchestra is only like a piano and 2 or 3 woodwinds. So it's for an opera, it's unbelievably inexpensive to produce. You need only pay, 4, maybe 5 singers and 4 or 5 instrumentalists. So it's, we don't charge all that much for tickets, and it's affordable for anybody. In fact, it's way, way less than most rock concerts. So.
Sure. And that sounds great. That sounds, sort of like this introduction to what opera is, where you can then, sort of wet everyone's beak a little bit. And again, using that wine analogy, it's not necessarily White Zinfandel, but it's definitely a consumer priced wine that will, help maybe draw people to full-scale productions if they're happening anywhere around them or in their community. And my wife and I are looking at planning a trip this fall to Paris. And at the time that we're going to be there, they're going to be, the Paris Opera House is going to be running 2 different productions. One is The Barber of Seville, and the other is The Ring Cycle.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if I could do 6 hours of The Ring Cycle, though.
Well, I'll tell you, as
6 hours of Wagner, that's a lot, man. I don't know if I could handle that, but we're definitely looking at possibly getting tickets to The Barber of Seville. But to sit anywhere worth seeing, anywhere that's worth, it's gonna be 200 to 250 euros a ticket.
Yeah, right. Well, if instead of seeing the whole Ring Cycle, see if you can just get tickets to Die Walküre.
Not to go to Damerung?
No. Get tickets to Die Walküre.
Okay.
If you're only going to see a part of it, get that. That is pretty much, I'm not going to say it's completely self-contained, but it'll be enough. It'll be enough.
I only need 2 hours of Siegfried and Brunhilde. I don't need all 6 hours.
Yeah. But yeah, try Die Valkyrie if you can just get tickets to that. I think that'll be great for you.
Well, I hope, Daniel, that you and Jonathan have plenty of free hours available to get this project moving. And I hope that you will keep us posted as to the progress. And of course, when it's ready to debut, we want to help promote that however we can.
That would be most appreciated. Most appreciated. And thank you so much for the time here, Stephen. I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. It was a great conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, he is Daniel Stephen Crafts. You can find some of his work, as he mentioned, on YouTube. We'll put some links on the Patreon page that will help you find Daniel and some of his compositions. He mentioned his piece with his friend, the tenor, Mr. Cheney. And he also, I think there's some Gonzo stuff available too online, isn't there, Daniel?
There is a YouTube channel, Gonzo Opera YouTube channel.
Great.
Yes.
Well, we'll help everybody. We'll direct you all to how to find that by some links on our Patreon page. Thank you again. It's been a great chat.
Same for me.
Well, there you have it, fellow Quillers. You know, there are a great number of theater professionals who throughout time have complained and even blamed opera for the demise of theater. Competing on such a grand scale took the play into spectacle rather than the truth of the spoken text, is the argument often made by critics and scholars over the years. Later, there were those who complained that the big screen of cinema had destroyed the theater. Of course, television was supposed to be the final nail in the coffin, but here we are, all of these centuries later, and the general public is still willing to support live theatrical productions. I think our author knew these works would still find an appreciative audience this many centuries later, which is why every word doth speak his name. I love the idea of bare bones opera. I love the idea of an opera based on the life of Edward de Vere, regardless of whether or not he was Shakespeare. His life fits every necessary aspect of a solid opera plot. I can't wait to hear the score, read the libretto, and play any role I can in bringing it to an audience. Speaking of audience, I'd like to be a tad vainglorious for just a moment and simply crow about selling more tickets to our 5th annual summer season here in the Rogue Valley than ever before, growing our patron base by a solid additional 10%. This group of artists that I have been so blessed to lead in this adventure are some of the greatest people I have ever known. Our team is now looking forward to next season's shows, which will include productions of Julius Caesar and As You Like It. It will be our 6th annual season here in the Rogue Valley of Southern Oregon, and it will be our first concept season, a concept I've been wanting to do for a very long time. I'm going to set Julius Caesar in Prohibition-era mafia style. Caesar is sort of a don, and the senators as sort of the leaders of the families vying for power. Works extremely well. I have Tommy guns on the way. And we're doing As You Like It, something I've done before with great success. And so I'm bringing it back now after quite a number of years, is As You Like It set in the Wild West. It lends itself perfectly to that setting. It's the most pastoral of Shakespeare's plays. And think The Forest of Arden is more of a saloon or the Western frontier, as it were. So that's going to be our season for 2027, and we're very excited about that already, and we hope to grow another 10% or more each year. We'll be selling out every show very soon. Theater people are the best people in the world, and yes, that includes Daniel Stephen Crafts and the work he is doing. We'll post some links to our Patreon page so you can easily find his content. Speaking of the Patreon page, you can receive those notices about supplemental content, posts, updates, and of course, bonus feature information by becoming a free Patreon subscriber. You can find that button on the homepage of our website. don'tquillthepodcast.com. Don'tquillthepodcast.com. Click the red Patreon button. Take you right to the Patreon page where you can become a free subscriber. Of course, we'd love for you to consider joining the Quiller Nation at a subscriber level. And if you become a serial quiller, you unlock that growing bonus feature library, get entered into our Quiller of the Month drawing, and receive the proud honor of donning the new Serial Quiller logo merchandise. Not to mention, you get that knowledge that you are contributing to the future of this program and the work we hope, we are doing to advance the cause of seeking truth. That said, I'd like to acknowledge our July Quiller of the Month. I believe producer Jake said it was our first ever back-to-back Quiller of the Month because she also won the spin in June, and that is serial quiller Sandi Boney. Sandi, congratulations on your back-to-back wins, and that just goes to show that every month is random, and wow, wouldn't it be something if she could win 3 times in a row? That would be really strange. The odds of that would be very, very rare, especially since the serial quiller list continues to grow as more and more of you join at that subscriber level to help continue the program. I know Jake keeps the stats over all these years, and we once sent out a record of all the winners over time. I think it was once in our not so regular email blast. Anyway, I know there are several winners who have won it more than once, maybe even a 3-time winner or 2, but congrats to Sandi for getting it 2 in a row. You could be next. Only August's episodes will tell the tale, and until then, my fellow quillers, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at don'tquillthepod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com. don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.